Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're exploring a text that caught my eye because it tackles two things you might not think go together: the human ego and the tiny atom.
Yeah, that's an interesting combo. Kind of makes you wonder what they could possibly have in common, right?
Exactly. And the text doesn't waste any time getting to the good stuff. It jumps right in calling the ego the key to the divine names, like a hidden treasure. It even uses words like talisman and mystery. I don't know about you, but that definitely piqued my interest. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think it's hinting that the ego isn't just about looking inward, it's also about understanding the bigger picture, like how creation works.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, the text has this analogy comparing the ego to a boundary line. Like how we can only see light when there's something like darkness to define it.
I see what you mean.
It's saying that our ego, our limitations, help us grasp the vastness of God, much like darkness defines light.
That makes sense. So our limitations are actually crucial to understanding the unlimited.
Right, and the text gives some concrete examples, like our knowledge is limited, but God's knowledge is absolute. We might think we own things, but really, God is the ultimate owner.
So by recognizing our limitations, we start to grasp the immensity of God's attributes. Pretty profound stuff.
It is. Now, here's where things get really interesting. The text talks about two paths the ego can take. It calls the first one the path of prophets.
The path of prophets. Okay, what's that all about?
Well, on this path, the ego gets that it's not the center of the universe. It's more like a servant, acknowledging that there's a higher power in charge.
So it's all about humility and recognizing you're part of something bigger.
Exactly. The ego on this path finds fulfillment by aligning itself with divine will.
Fascinating. And what about the other path?
The second path is called the path of philosophers. Think of it as the ego striking out on its own.
Independent, going its own way.
Yeah, exactly. The focus here is on self-perfection, like trying to become godlike through your own efforts.
Two very different approaches. What happens as a result of choosing one path over the other?
The text gets pretty vivid here, comparing the path of prophets to the tree of Tuba, a symbol of paradise and ultimate bliss. But the path of philosophers, that's likened to the tree of Zaqqum, a terrifying tree with nasty fruit.
Whoa, those are some powerful images. Does the text give examples of people who followed each path?
It does. Think of prophets and saints. Their lives were all about serving a higher purpose, embodying that tree of Tuba. But then you have tyrants and those obsessed with idols. They were consumed by their own desires, a classic example of the tree of Zaqqum in action.
Wow, two paths with drastically different outcomes. Clearly the ego can lead to either darkness or light.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground with the ego, but now the text takes a turn and dives into the atom, the basic building block of everything. But here's the thing, it doesn't treat atoms like they're just random bits of stuff floating around.
Yeah, it's more like they're moving with a purpose, almost like they're following a plan, kind of like tiny messengers.
Wow, so even at the microscopic level, there's this sense of order, a bigger design at play.
Exactly, and the text doesn't just stop there. It goes on to lay out 5 points to show how much wisdom and purpose is packed into the way atoms move.
5 points. Okay, I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
All right, so point number 1, it's all about the renewal of life, how atoms are constantly rearranging to create new beings, ensuring that life keeps going.
That's pretty amazing. It's like this cosmic dance of creation happening at the tiniest level imaginable.
It is, and point number 2, it talks about how the earth can grow food, cultivate all these crops. The text sees this as a sign of God's power and mercy, how he provides for everyone.
So even something as basic as growing food has this deeper meaning when you look at the atoms involved.
Right, it all comes back to those tiny building blocks. And that brings us to point number 3, which is all about the cycles of nature.
Cycles of nature, okay, like the seasons changing.
Yeah, exactly. The text says these cycles are proof of God's art, like fingerprints you can see everywhere. And of course, it's the movement of atoms that makes it all happen.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it that way, these grand cosmic events, all tied to something as small as an atom.
It really puts things in perspective. Okay, now point number 4, this one gets a little more out there.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It suggests that atoms aren't just working in our physical world, but they're also prepping things for the world of inner dimensions and the hereafter.
Whoa, so the text is saying there's a connection between what's happening with atoms and the spiritual realm.
Yeah, it's like the physical and the spiritual are intertwined, and what happens at the atomic level has a ripple effect we can't even fully grasp.
That's pretty heavy stuff. So what's the last point?
The 5th point is all about how the movement of atoms is basically showcasing God's perfection and glory. It's saying that even in those tiny, invisible movements, you can see evidence of a creator.
I like that idea, that even the smallest things point to something bigger. As we're talking about this, I can't help but notice a connection between what the text says about the ego and what it says about the atom.
Yeah, I see it too. There's definitely a parallel there.
It's like we're looking at these two seemingly different things, the ego, something internal, and the atom, something external. But they're both being used to understand something much bigger, something beyond our everyday experience. What strikes you about that connection?
Well, what really stand out to me is that both the ego and the atom are like lenses, ways of seeing the divine. It's like the text is saying, hey, whether you look inward or outward, you're going to find signs pointing to something bigger.
That's a really great way of putting it. And it reminds me of those two paths of the ego we discussed earlier, the path of prophets and the path of philosophers.
Right. And when we look at those paths alongside what the text says about atoms, some really interesting connections start to emerge. It's like both the ego and the atom have this dual nature, this capacity for different paths with totally different outcomes.
I'm curious, can you unpack that a little more for us?
Sure, think about the path of prophets. It's all about humility, surrender, and aligning with divine will, right? That lines up perfectly with how the text describes the atom as a messenger carrying out God's plan.
So you're saying there's a link between an ego that knows its place and an atom that follows its cosmic blueprint.
Exactly. Both the ego on that path and the atom in its natural state, they're both serving something larger, contributing to the beauty and complexity of creation. But now let's flip the script and consider the path of philosophers, where the ego wants to be independent, a self-made God. That path, when you put it next to the text's view of the atom, it's a totally different picture.
Okay, help me understand that contrast.
Remember how the text shoots down the idea of atoms just randomly bumping around? It argues that the order we see points to a conscious creator.
Right, it's pushing back on this purely materialistic view.
Now think about the ego on the path of philosophers. It's all about self-elevation, trying to become a god on its own, like it's separate from the very source it came from.
So it's like that ego is trying to deny the inherent order of the universe, kind of like saying an atom can just decide to be something greater without any outside influence.
You got it. It's a rejection of a higher power. And that's the common thread between the ego on that misguided path and a materialistic take on atoms, right? Both of them are all about self-sufficiency and ignoring the bigger picture. Yeah, it really does make you stop and think, it's like this whole exploration of the ego and the atom is pointing us towards this idea that everything's connected. It's an invitation to look deeper and find the meaning behind our lives and how the universe works.
And what's really cool is that the text doesn't just drop these big ideas on us and leave us hanging. It actually offers a sense of hope and empowerment.
Totally. It reminds us that we have a choice. The ego can go down a dark path or it can choose a path of light.
So it's not just a philosophy lesson. It's like a roadmap guiding us toward a better way of being in the world.
Right, and by showing us the purpose behind the way atoms move, it fills us with this sense of wonder about creation. It helps us see the divine artistry, even in the most ordinary things.
It's a beautiful reminder that we're not alone in some random universe. We're part of something so much bigger, something designed with incredible precision.
And that's the key to finding true fulfillment. When we get that we're all connected and we start living our lives with a higher purpose, we tap into a level of meaning and joy that goes beyond our limited egos.
It's like switching from a me perspective to a we perspective, seeing ourselves as part of this ground tapestry.
Exactly. And that's where real freedom lies. The ego, which can sometimes hold us back, becomes a tool for understanding and connecting with the divine. And the atom, which might seem like just a tiny bit of matter, becomes proof of the beauty and wisdom of the universe.
This has been an amazing deep dive. We've gained a brand new way of looking at ourselves and the world. As we wrap things up, is there one last question our listeners can take with them as they continue exploring these ideas?
How about this? If even the smallest atom, this fundamental building block of everything, has meaning and purpose, operating within a divine framework, what does that tell us about the potential we have as human beings with our consciousness, creativity, and capacity for love?
That's a powerful question. It challenges us to step up and live our lives with intention, knowing that our choices have a ripple effect on the world around us. So as we conclude this deep dive, let's hold on to that sense of wonder we've discovered about the ego and the atom. May their interconnectedness inspire us to live lives filled with meaning, purpose, and a deep connection to the divine.